difference a day made. 24 little hours brought the sun and the flower.
Hi, I'm Troy Miller. I'd love to share some thoughts with you about musical creativity.
My yesterday was blue tea, but now I'm part of you.
Whenever you make an album, as a producer or as a writer, you're looking for something unique, first of all, but also something that's familiar. So that's always a challenge, making new music. And it was no different working with China Moses, who brought me fully fledged songs that she'd written, and some of them co-written by another friend of mine, Ollie Rockberger, who's an amazing songwriter too. And they brought me these fully fledged songs. And really, it's often just about bringing them alive, and bringing them alive in a unique way, in a way that suits the artist, and reflects their character, reflects the message, more importantly. So really that's at the forefront of my mind in any music making situation, but particularly with China, because a lot of these songs have real meanings for her, and some of them delve into some darker areas, you know, of thought. And so it was quite interesting bringing those ideas and messages to light. And it's always exciting for me, the genesis of a project. And I loved working with China. This is my first time working with her, even though we recorded the album, well, nearly 3 years ago in New York, Brooklyn, and some of it in London. And now this is really the first live offering with orchestra, so it's super exciting for us. Yeah, there's really 3 strands to being a producer, a really great music producer, in my opinion. The first is really understanding the artist and understanding the person behind the artist, and understanding the message behind the song. And those things are usually linked. So I think this takes a bit of thought sometimes as a music producer, and sometimes your role can extend to almost being like a therapist in a way. And, you know, it's cathartic for us too as producers, because we're helping somebody give birth to music. So it's like the musical equivalent of being a midwife or something, you know. That's how I view it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, obviously there's a functionality to being a producer. You're recording the music, and that often involves playing instruments. I'm very thankful that I've had so much experience playing different instruments, piano and drums, and I think that's a key part, is really understanding the role of the instrument in the context of the music you're recording, and then also the musical arrangement, which is tied to the playing and who you might put in the room, whether it's a recording experience that's just a few people or many people, affects the sound and the arrangement. And so there's a functionality to it. Also, there is the element of pursuing the message and realizing the message. And I suppose the older I get, the more concerned with that I become, because music always carries a weight of a message. What is it you're trying to communicate? What is it you're trying to say? And in what context? And so there's this push-pull sometimes. These things affect one another. But I think understanding the message and understanding the artist and what they need, and in a way their uniqueness, helps you with the musical arrangement and the recording. It really serves to inform all the functional things. So that's, in my mind, that's what makes a good producer. I think also being persistent with ideas, because it's important to have a vision. And sometimes you make decisions along the way that fall outside of the vision because you're trying to be unique, or you're trying to do something special or new, especially if you're thinking outside of formulas. And it's important always to remember the vision, and it sometimes involves scrapping something or putting something to one side because it didn't work along the way. But the ultimate vision has to be fulfilled, and so it requires patience. It also requires organization, because often, especially if you're working with a label, there's a deadline involved. There's always a lead time leading up to a release of music. So you have to be very practical thinking. And as I say, if you're in line with the vision, it's easier to make decisions here and there, and quick decisions, and being decisive, and just going for it, just being brave, and not being afraid to fail. All the things you would say about life, really, is true of making music, if you're doing it with integrity. One of the most important things as a young musician or as a young producer is always to be open to learning and make it known to other people that you want to learn, because the learning never stops, ultimately. I'm still learning. I hope I will still be learning if I live to 70, 80, by God's grace. I'll still be learning, because it's with that attitude that things happen. And relationships happen too, musical relationships. I think the moment you become too confident in yourself and your knowledge and what you already know, that's when it can close the doors to creativity and to relationships with other musical people. So I try to keep alive in my musical thoughts and in my listening and in my learning. And the learning never stops, but you can learn from anybody too. You can learn from somebody who's way younger than you, who has new experiences, interesting ideas. Equally, you learn from people that are much older than you, that have a lifetime of experience. I've always loved surrounding myself with people who have been doing it a lot longer than I have, for decades. for half a century, maybe 50 years. Somebody's been doing music. What's their experience? What can I learn from it? I mean, I was blessed to spend a whole summer with Diana Ross because I produced her last album. But just the wealth of experience and knowledge, just being in the same room as her, really, is significant. So I think it's good to go out of your way to spend time with people who have knowledge and experience, and be open to learning. That's number one. I think there's always an element of thinking outside of yourself, you know, and I think it's quite a deliberate thing that you have to get outside of your own head, because as humans we can follow patterns of behavior, and you know, if you're not careful, what you do can become functional and formulaic. And it's not that formulas are bad, but they can sometimes cramp or stilt creativity. So it's good to kind of think outside of the box. And again, it relates to spending time with others, and being open to learning. But it's also, I think, a choice in your own mind to explore. And I think this is so important too. I feel most creative when I see eye to eye with somebody else in the room. Especially if it's a collaboration, you have to see eye to eye. You have to be sort of on an equal path, if you like, and you have to find common ground. But when you do find common ground, it's very freeing, you know, because you have somebody who agrees with you, and you agree with them, you know, and there's something powerful in that, and a freedom, and you have freedom to then explore creativity in a musical way. I think a lot of creatives probably find that they have to, you know, in order to get outside of their mind, they might use unhealthy ways of doing that. But I think there's a healthy way of doing it, which is through relationships. And ultimately, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I look to God for creativity because I think He's the source. I think the original purpose of music is music was made for worship. So we're worshipping something when we play music. If it's not God, it's something else. It's sex, or it's people, or it's yourself, or maybe material things, or human ideas. But it's always a kind of act of worship. And so I get a creative urge when I pray and when I meditate. And again, this is linked to the message. I think if you're proclaiming a truth, or you're saying something that's honest, say for instance, it could be anything, you're honest about your own life, mistakes or failures, or even the joyous parts of life, that you're being honest with it and you're connecting with that. So I think there's a creativity that comes from being honest. Yeah, but sometimes creativity comes when you're in isolation and when you're on your own, because me, myself, I'm naturally an introvert. So I kind of recharge when I'm on my own. When I'm on my own, I find creativity in the silence and in the quiet moments, away from distractions, away from your phone, for instance, away from social media, because that way you feel a freedom. You don't feel constrained by other ideas or distractions or philosophies or, things that have nothing to do with the music or the creativity. It could be money, for instance, that's a distraction. And it's a difficult thing to balance, because as musicians and producers, we're paid to do what we do. This is how we make our living. I make a living from it, but it's a temptation sometimes to be guided by that, but I think ultimately the best creativity comes from a pure place and a naive place, in a way. Because I often hear artists say, and I can relate to this, that, I felt so creative when I wrote my first music or my first song, or when I was a child. I mean, my personal memories, I used to handwrite scores when I was a teenager, and because computers weren't doing it when I was a kid. And I found an enormous freedom in that, and also a freedom because there was lots I didn't know about music, and so there was a naivety there was a freedom there for creativity, kind of like a child would be playing a game. Sometimes children have a vivid imagination because it's not corrupted or influenced by worldly things. So yeah, trying to get back to that kind of place, childlike state, is a good place to be with creativity. China Moses is really unique. She has a unique pedigree, if you like, a musical pedigree. Her mother is Dee Dee Bridgewater, as you well know. But the things that rub off on you, when your family is in that environment, is amazing. And the thing I love about China is, first of all, her sense of freedom and her sense of being so comfortable in her own skin. And that's not an easy thing to achieve. It's not something you're necessarily taught, but that's something she has. It's kind of innate. And she's very giving with it, I was telling her earlier today that she has this sort of way about her that makes you feel you can be open to her, you can open up. And that comes out in the music, I think. She spent so much time in Brooklyn, New York, so much time in Paris, being French speaking also, so much time in London. So she has an eclectic music taste, and that makes things exciting, in the studio, when you know that somebody is so open. They have an understanding of jazz, they have an understanding of R&B, of church music, a love of the orchestra. You throw all these things into the pot, it's going to spark creativity. And so I really love that about China. She has a knack in her songwriting of getting to the heart of a matter. I'd like to call it pithy, like it has substance to it. And even the dark things she's able to talk about and make it relatable. And she's very brave, actually, tackling some dark issues. It's not something that everybody's willing to take on, but she is so incredibly musically brave, I would say she is. Yeah.